This episode of New Politics was released on the 12th of February, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
This week we had a massive political drama in Sydney that could have totally been avoided, and that was due to the arrival of President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, who shouldn't have been invited here in the first place. And the social cohesion that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese keeps talking about was nowhere to be seen on the streets of Sydney.
We have the right to demonstrate. This is not a police. Hands off her. You sexist bitch. Stop it. Stop assaulting her. Stop assaulting her. Let her go. Let her go.
And there's many people who were opposed to the visit of President Herzog, and there's good reason for that. There's strong evidence that he's incited a genocide when he said these words.
Unequivocally, it's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true. They could have risen up, they could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat. But we're at war. We are at war. We're at war we are defending our homes. We're protecting our homes. That's the truth. And then when a nation protects its home, it fights. And we will fight until we'll break their backbone.
He's also signed bombs that were then dropped on innocent civilians. Israel is practicing a genocide. It is an apartheid state, and it is committing war crimes. And if you're opposed to these sorts of actions, well, there's no point in waiting for the next election to show your disapproval for this sort of action. In New South Wales, that's 12 months away. Federally, it's over 2.5 years away. So we do have a right to protest and show our elected representatives and the government of the day that this is unacceptable. And this is why so many people decided to protest, not just in Sydney, but in 30 different cities and towns all around Australia. And these protests were primarily about this visit by President Herzog, but underneath all of this is the new hate speech laws that we spoke about last week that have been introduced pretty much all across Australia. And it seems that Queensland didn't want to miss out on all of these new laws, and they introduced their own legislation during the week that will ban the use of phrases such as globalise the intifada and from the river to the sea, which will result in an arrest and up to 2 years of jail time. Now, this is all supposedly to stamp out antisemitism. So using these terms, you get 2 years of jail, but you can pretty much stand anywhere in Australia at the moment and say, I love Hitler, or abolish the Jewish lobby, which is exactly what neo-Nazis did right outside New South Wales Parliament House last year. And that's okay. You won't get arrested for that. And that rally last year, that was actually a rally approved by the New South Wales Police, the same New South Wales Police that were beating up pro-Palestine supporters. So we can see that there's a lot of inconsistencies here. Anything that specifically relates to Palestine, well, that's gone. You can't say that or protest about that, but everything else seems to be okay. Even Nazi commentary is okay. So this is all about protecting the ideology of Zionism. This is what this is all about. It's protecting the government of Israel and its actions in Gaza and West Bank.
An armed camp. Haganah troops search for Arabs after capturing the city. Arab strongpoints are taken after being blasted to rubble. During the mopping up operations, Haganah forces seek out every Arab, and barricades are set up to screen those who had not already fled the city. Everyone is searched. With the relinquishing of the British mandate, Palestine is rocked by full-scale war, and both sides mobilize. Arab captives are held for evacuation to Acre. Women flee with what belongings they can carry. And as Palestine struggles for national existence, the nations wrestles with the problem. Here, Sir Alexander Cadogan states Britain's unchanging stand on the...
Now, I don't want to give too much of a history lesson today because we haven't got all day, but the values of Zionism are absolutely repulsive and effectively implemented with the Balfour Declaration in 1917. But the values of Zionism are to completely remove the non-Jewish population from that region and claim it as a completely Jewish state of Israel. And this was all supported by Britain and the big powers in the early part of the 20th century, and their role has effectively been taken over by the United States as the big benefactor of Israel, and essentially it's for its own geopolitical advantage in the Middle East. And just over 100 years ago, in that region of mandatory Palestine, the Arab population was 94%, and the Jewish population was just under 6%. And through pretty much the terrorist actions by Israeli interests, the Nakba, which started in 1946, and then the creation of Israel in 1948, the various wars that have been had since then, settler expansion, and now the genocide that started up in 2023, well, the Jewish population in that region is now around 77%. And in about 20 years' time, if things continue in the way that they're currently going, well, there won't be any Palestinians left within Israel within 20 years or so. So, in other words, it will be a full and complete genocide.
It's been more than 700 days since Hamas's terrorist attacks against Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking 251 hostage. For almost as long, an independent commission of inquiry from the UN Human Rights Council has been investigating whether Israel's response constitutes genocide. Now they've come to a conclusion.
Genocide is occurring in Gaza and is continuing to occur, and the responsibility lies with the state of Israel.
All of this, the Commission says, violates 4 of the 5 genocidal acts defined by the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, namely the killing of more than 60,000 people since the start of the conflict, the serious physical or mental harm, including the destruction of homes and displacement of 1.9 million people, acts designed to destroy the population, including the destruction of medical facilities, educational, cultural and religious sites, and measures intended to prevent births, like the direct targeting of maternity hospitals and fertility clinics.
So we can see that this is a supremacist project that seeks permanent Jewish dominance over that land, over that region, and has relied on displacement, on coercion, and the denial of Palestinian self-determination. That's the only way that all of this can happen, and this has also culminated in those actions in Gaza that the United Nations and many other organisations have described as genocidal. So looking at the values of from the river to the sea, or globalise the intifada, which is what people are saying today, well, that's a response to this genocide. That's the response to that long-term Zionist project to completely remove Palestinians from the region. So for a lot of people, that's a racist agenda, that's an agenda of apartheid, and it's an agenda of genocide. And it's not just me saying that, it's outlined by the United Nations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Médecins Sans Frontières, Lemkin Institute of Genocide Prevention. There's a lot of organisations on this list, Genocide Watch, and there's also several human rights organisations within Israel itself that have claimed that this is a genocide that's being perpetrated by the State of Israel. So this is what the Australian federal government and various state governments around Australia are protecting. And a lot of people have been asking us, well, why is this the case? Why are governments in Australia doing this? Well, essentially it's all about the power and control, and different forms of power, whether it's political or financial or whatever it is, they tend to gravitate towards each other. So that's the government, that's the Zionist lobby groups, captains of industry who directly support the State of Israel in whichever way they can, either through financial support or through technology support or through political influence. And it's usually a combination of all those 3 areas. And the whole agenda here, or the whole idea behind all of this, is to narrow the debate to favour their particular agenda, whether that's here in Australia or anywhere else in the world. Now, whatever you want to call that, power, influence, or something else, well, it's something that's very real, And it does exist, and it's a power that is used ruthlessly. And that's what we're seeing at the moment with President Herzog's visit to Australia.
Rolling out the red carpet for Israel's president. Isaac Herzog touched down in the nation's capital alongside Australia's Prime Minister.
This is me. I will see you soon.
A ceremonial welcome at the Governor-General's house and a warm handshake. Taking place amid a heavy security presence. Mr Herzog planted a tree at the Israeli embassy.
And it's always regarded as anti-Semitic when you point these factors out. And, you know, when you say that the Israel lobby has got a lot of influence within Australian politics and Australian society, but you just have to look at the evidence. Half of the Sydney Harbour, well, from the CBD all the way down to Bondi, well, that was essentially shut down by police. There was all this police thuggery against protesters in the Sydney CBD, and all of these new laws have been introduced very quickly to shut down debate on this. And even within the New South Wales Labor Party, well, they're threatening to withdraw pre-selections if a party member says anything that's deemed to be anti-Semitic, and not sure who would decide what that is. Presumably, if a MP says from the river to the sea, well, there's your pre-selection gone. And all of this is quite outrageous. Israel essentially is a tin pot genocidal country created in the Middle East, set up by the imperial powers, Britain and France at the time, and then supported by the United States. And that's the only reason why it's a military power. And it's been given all of these exclusive rights. Now, we don't have specific rules to outlaw the criticism of China or the Chinese government or the United States government. And there's certainly never been a crackdown of protests against these governments or any other government in the world. Not when George W. Bush came to Australia, and sure, there were some protests at the time and there was some police brutality at the time as well, but protest was permitted. There were no restrictions when Xi Jinping came to Australia in 2014, yet we're treating President Isaac Herzog, who's been in Australia for most of this week, as some kind of overlord and important person to Australia. Now, he might be an important person to the Israeli community and the Zionists in Australia, but he is not an important person to the Australian community. The other point is that this is a political visit for President Herzog. If it was to be a show of support for the Jewish community after the Bondi terror attacks in December, well, it would have been better to have someone who is a religious figure, or someone like, for example, Rabbi David Rosen, who is based in Israel. He's been an advisor to the Vatican. He's been an advisor to Islamic leaders, also an advisor to the United Nations, and he explicitly makes that separation between Judaism and the state violence created by the state of Israel. So that would have been a better outcome, someone who could speak on an ethical and a religious basis and not politicise the event, which is essentially what all of this has become. And Albanese should have stood up to this proposal by the Zionist groups in Sydney to invite President Herzog. And he's got a whole team of advisors there in Canberra. Someone could have said, well, no, that's not a good idea. You can invite someone like David Rosen. And we wouldn't have had any of these problems that we had all of this week. And Albanese should have said, no, we're not going to have this political leader for something like this. But that is not what the Zionist groups wanted in Australia. So Israel is an international pariah at the moment, and the best way to rehabilitate itself is to get invited to a respectable country like Australia. So you can have all those photo opportunities with political leaders such as the Prime Minister and the Premier of New South Wales, and then go and have a meeting with the Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, have all of this footage of greeting school children with flowers and that sort of stuff, which, by the way, is exactly what Adolf Hitler used to do in the 1930s, but let's not go there. And the whole idea is to normalise the state of Israel and its political leadership. And then alongside all of this, have all of these ridiculous suppressions of rights and free speech. And this gives the state of Israel and the president of Israel a level of respectability that it just does not deserve. So essentially, this has all been a propaganda tour, and Australia, once again, has been taken for a ride.
Sydney Town Hall, peak hour. It's volatile and violent.
They pepper sprayed me.
Hands up, not resisting, this man is grabbed by his shirt, punched repeatedly in the ribs by police and pulled to the ground. Another man tackled on tram tracks, arms restrained, his head slammed into the concrete, more punches thrown. He was one of 27 people arrested last night when protesters clashed with police in the middle of the CBD.
The protest against the Herzog visit, well, that did proceed at Sydney Town Hall. There were about 20,000 people there, and there were also many other protests all around Australia. The action was peaceful, and although the New South Wales Supreme Court rejected the Palestine Action Group's request to provide legal cover for the event, it still proceeded and went ahead. And of course, there was a lot of police brutality there, which was totally unnecessary, but this was essentially a show of support to the government of Israel, beating up Australian citizens for the sake of showing off to the government of Israel. That's what this was all about. So once again, we see the Zionist lobby groups in Australia playing Albanese like a violin. They've got New South Wales Premier Chris Minns in their pocket, Peter Malinauskas in South Australia as well, and now they've got David Crucifili from Queensland, and with his fear of missing out and deciding to introduce his own version of draconian legislation. And to finish off this propaganda trip to Australia, President Herzog was hosted by Prime Minister Albanese for a fancy dinner, and I just wonder what they talked about. Did they talk about how the Israel Defence Forces murdered the Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham, and how the IDF photographed her body and then released it onto social media with other Israeli citizens labelling the photo with the Australian whore? Did they talk about that, I wonder? Did they talk about how the IDF bulldozed over Australian graves from the Second World War in the Gaza War Cemetery? Just wonder if they talked about the sale of parts for F-35 planes that are then used to bomb civilians, or did they talk about some of those bombs that were signed by Isaac Herzog before they were used against civilians as well? Did they talk about the Palantir surveillance systems within Australian government and military services? So would have been a lot to talk about, would have been a busy dinner, and that's even before we get started on Israeli war crimes, breaches of international law, and on top of that, their outrageous genocide. So this is what all of this is about, giving Israel the credibility that it does not deserve. And Australian governments have been once again used for political purposes by Israel, and once again, we have been let down by our political leaders who have just not been strong enough to resist the pressure that's been forced upon them by these Zionist lobbyists who will just never stop. They'll never give up. So you give them what they want, then they ask for more, and that's a lesson that our leaders will just never learn.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.